There we were drinking at our fave dive bar when I concluded my story on how I secretly still played with Barbies and believed in Santa well into high school. Everyone nodded, chuckled, and then proceeded to more normal table topics for our group, like bad sex and good brunch spots. As the conversation moved on, I quietly asked myself, how the F did that come up? Not one person had even brought up Christmas, and the Barbie movie was still in development. Where did I bring this up from? And why would I choose to share this supposed humiliation? Because honestly, I'm not the type to, side note, I am not the type to have guilty pleasures. I don't feel guilty about pleasure. Pleasure me. Okay, continue. Growing up, I felt like I had to be overwhelmingly honest and over-explain my intentions with my dad because he was convinced I wanted something from him, which in perspective, yeah, for him to be a dad. He was so obsessed with making sure I did not have 1 ounce of his money and eventually money of my own that talking to him was like talking to a detective and marked how I entered so many of my relationships trying to convince people I was a good person. There's not one room that I do not enter in some form of energetic service, trying to charm people, not to manipulate them into giving me something, but to assure them that I'm safe. This mental training was peak my father's abuse, consistently claiming to me that he did not feel safe with me because I was always discussing how he hurt me. The problem was it was extremely rare. For however much I overshared my intentions, I didn't actually share my problems, my needs, and wants. My father had successfully silenced me into no longer complaining about his verbal, psychological, and financial assaults against me and my mother. So now he was complaining about my silence and how I just quietly felt he was wronging me. When I look back in my life in grand irony, I notice how so many people always claimed I was transparent, unable to hide my feelings as if they were my skin. Yet I never spoke them. Whenever confronted by this external assessment, I would just nod and say I was fine, then return to whatever blankness or vast imagination was calling me mentally. At times I wonder if that headspace was born from the various times my father would yell at me that I was nothing, stupid, ugly, and fat, and then proceeded to shop for himself and spend thousands of dollars. He pushed me to leave my body and only re-enter it when he called for me to emotionally stabilize him. This dynamic has perforated my love life, with not one romantic partnership, not being me playing therapist to either a narcissist, sadist, or psychopath, or astrologically what many call a man with a Leo sun. Ironically, the spiritual world has a name for people like me, the wounded warrior. Lately, I've been really working to not enter people's lives in my usual role of healer, motivator, or wise therapist. In being reshaped by my father to become the emotional servant of every asshole in the universe, I realized I was never going to be happy if I believed I had to give and never receive or even take. My downfall has been in consistently learning that what you give, people will take, and very rarely will they even think of thanks. The few phenomenal friends I have is because they did take, but they were grateful enough to give. Thus now when I enter rooms, I wait for them to find me. I want to attract those who will love me enough to make me feel safe. No overshare necessary. So my father, one thing that abusers do, especially people that are very narcissistic, very sadist, my dad was textbook, is kind of, you never can rest with them. Even one of the reasons I love entertainment, it was one of the only ways I could connect with my parents. My mother was always tired, but she always sat down, watched TV or a movie with me. My father, when he wasn't he was a very vulgar man, just always cursing and saying horrible things about his other family, about the world, about me. Just everything was negative. Everything was bad except him. His burden was to live in the negative, never be it, right? And what happened was I grew incredibly silent with him. And it enacted in me. He always wanted to know what I wanted. What was my intention? Why was I really calling him? And what's so crazy is I was calling him because he was my dad. And I kept on calling him because I really wanted him to be paternal. And he was obsessed with making sure I never got anything material from him. No money, no clothing, no gifts, nothing, nothing, nothing. Not even his other family. Like I couldn't meet my siblings. He didn't want me to because he said he felt a lot of shame. And I just felt like when he started to badger me about my silence, it overwhelmed me and it bothered me because I thought, this is what you wanted. You wanted me to quiet my sadness. Now you're complaining that I'm quietly sad. I can't give you happiness because you're making sure that I feel terrible and put on a mask. And now you're complaining about the mask. And what I feel is, and maybe this is my version of imposter syndrome, is that whenever I go into rooms or I start relationships, I realize now I start them in service mode. I just enter them with this energy of, let me make sure this person knows they're safe with me. Let me give them so they know I'm not a taker. And all I attract is takers. All my relationships, especially with men, have always been with people that take. And then I'm writing, fantasy novels of this guy who does exist. But unfortunately, because where I am emotionally, he doesn't exist yet for me. And the fantasy is a person who gives, a person who protects me, a person who loves me, a person who makes me feel safe. And it's so funny because I'm on Book Talk. I love reading. And a lot of women were discussing, and I'll probably, now that I think about it, I should probably write an episode about this, the kind of how men, one thing that I learned as a blossoming stand-up comedian is that men use visuals in terms of sex. Like, I can't believe how many tabs of porn men will open just to knock a butt out. And, women, we use, I guess, the same amount of tabs, but in fantasizing about love, in trying to ignite what we want and what we seek, because we know what we don't want. And that's the problem with being abused and being oppressed and being repressed. You always know what you don't want. And for a long time, you will assume that shows you what you do want, but you're still living in a limited concept because want is unlimited. You could want everything. You could want so much more. You could want differently. You could want new. Just because you have like the do not section doesn't necessarily mean you have the do. And I realize that now because I've been such a servant in so many of my dynamics. Now I'm just trying to figure out, what do I want? I do want kindness. I do want someone to make me feel safe. I do want somebody who's kind of very serious and anchored and emotionally stable would be nice, because my father was just a very vulgar, overwhelming, messy soul. And he was more obsessed on convincing people that he wasn't what he was than actually healing and growing and changing that horrible behavior. And what I have found is that trauma manifests in different ways. The ways he traumatized me has manifested in me, again, being a servant, but also not picking up and going for and treasuring the people that do give to me. There are people that do love me, and that is incredibly special. And I can't sit here and complain and unpack how the people I love didn't love me back while having a few that I'm not loving. So I'm really working on myself in terms of learning the proper levels of sharing with people, learning how to assess who deserves my time and energy to share with, and also learning that I don't need to, the minute you start over-explaining your intentions or kind of say these, I have a very self-deprecating humor, which is so typical of trauma victims. And I think it's also very typical of people who suffer from depression. It totally aligns with that mentality I have, that daddy-based mentality I have of just, I have to enter the room with everybody knowing that I won't hurt them. And I make sure they're safe by never saying they hurt me. And if they start poking and prodding, just cry quieter. And it sucks. And I'm just trying to unlearn that mentality. I don't have to make myself a joke. I don't have to make myself a bodyguard and save everybody and make sure they all feel okay. It's okay not to be liked. And my father proved that in an odd way, because everybody liked him, but nobody knew him. Nobody knows an abuser quite like their victim. I know my father like the back of my hand, and I know he loves no one because he doesn't love himself. Everything he does, he moved in fakeness. And he was smart. He was smart. And as I speak, I realize that the oversharing that he would make me do to make sure, ironically, he knew that I loved him without ever saying he loved me, was because deep down, he knew the reality. He knew he was abusing me. He knew he was bullying me. He knew he was just trying to make sure I didn't know it. And yet, you could play the game so much that eventually you get bored with it. And he started poking and prodding and trying to make me cry because he got bored with trying to avoid the tears. And he was a very sick man, smart, but mentally ill. Smart as hell, charming, lawyer, Mensa, con artist, scam artist. You know, he was a dual figure. And I think that now, when I look back on my oversharing, part of why eventually he was dying to leave my life and he became super abusive towards the end of our relationship was he knew the reality and he couldn't avoid it. I mean, I'm sure when people say that I'm transparent, you know, sometimes I don't want to cry, but the tears are right at the edge of my eyes. And people say it's actually a great quality. I kind of hate it. I wish I was a better liar, or a liar like my dad, but I wish I was a better liar like my dad, because he didn't use his lying powers to heal himself or give himself time. He used it to just take other people's time and money. But sometimes I feel you do need to be fake and kind of lie and push people a little away so you can process and what's going on with you. And I've always just been the center of nothing, you know, oversharing and never shared with, telling everybody everything about me and yet feeling so invisible. And I'm really trying to heal that. So that is a new episode of Daddy Recovery. Check out daddyrecovery.com and check out my music on all platforms as Deandra. Yeah.